Hello, welcome. And get your names down. We're going to cover test one today, okay? What I probably won't go through this extent when we do test two and three, because I mean, we're in college and I want you to, read between the lines. And I know you could on this one as well, but I'd like to, the first time for the first test, kind of indulge you and help you to ensure that you know exactly what's being thrown at you. You see my kind of style of tests and be able to excel. So at any rate, as I'm getting the names down here, let's see here. If you don't mind, Angelina, could you unmute yourself or type in your last name? Sorry.
Sorry, it's R-U-I-Z, Ruiz.
You got it. Thank you. Perfect. All right. Make sure I'm not leaving anybody out. And then I have a phone number, and I don't want to say that online, but if you, whoever, you should be able to see your identification as a phone number. If you could please let me know your name. All right, so in due time, the person who has an identification as a phone number, sometime before we leave, okay, let me know your name. So I'm going to share the screen, and we're going to go right through the test. Okay. So let's see here. Which of the following is an alleged reason for which knowledge of Native American culture and history is incomplete? One option, lack of sufficient written Native American sources. And that is true, right? Remember, we spoke about the stelae, the stone tablets with the hieroglyphic writings, the round counts, the codices. Most of those are found in Mesoamerica, not in present US territory. And so we do have a shortage of primary source accounts, written accounts from Native Americans to tell us their story, unfortunately. The second option, C. Vance Haynes theory. Remember that 13,000 years ago during the Wisconsin latest ice age, Native Americans traveled across the Bering Sea on land virtually. That theory, right, does not dovetail with all radiometric carbon dated objects discovered. That is true as well. Remember in South America, they carbon dated some objects 30,000 years ago. And then C, alleged cultural, linguistic, and biological ties between Native Americans and indigenous Siberians have not convinced academia universally. That also is true. And I had a PowerPoint slide on that, showing some, with the Diego Allel, the GMAT, some somewhat convincing evidence of some DNA ties, but it has not been universally accepted within academia. So much is still in the air. And then European chronicles are alleged by many to be ethnocentric and skewed, and that's absolutely true as well. Because, right, even if they had the best of intentions, to what extent can you objectively, extricate yourself from your own worldview, your own glasses that you're wearing, and truly see another people for who they are? And then also your access, it's in some cases it's hearsay with some of the Euro-American chroniclers from what they had heard had happened in Native American history. And so for various reasons, we can't take at face value everything that the European chroniclers wrote about Native American history. So all those are true. Which of the following points was not conveyed concerning Native American cultural achievements? European colonizers in modern academia usually look for evidence of manipulation of the environment, development of complex society, artistic expression, knowledge of the sciences and technology, and monotheism as indicators of how civilized a society is. Absolutely. We talked about the role of anthropology and perpetuating that assumption. Secondly, that considering the isolation of the Americas, the natives' Neolithic or New Stone Tool or farming revolution was relatively early in some places. According to the book 1491, that is true. C, that evidence for alleged signs of civilization within future U.S. territory appears earliest in the American Southwest and along the Mississippi River. That is still held to be true. And it's fascinating with Native American history. This narrative could easily change with some excavations. But right now that they have that there. So remember, we talked about the Anasazi, the Hohokam, the Mogollon, and other Pueblo natives of Arizona and their famous cities, Chaco Canyon, Pueblo Bonito, their farming and irrigation, their astronomical knowledge and archaeological feats. So yes, that the Plains tribes met criteria for civilized status first within the U.S., that is not according to the present narrative. So that's the one that's false. So remember, in some of these, you're actually looking for the wrong answer. Number 3, what was mentioned as common cultural traits shared by many American tribes despite their diversity? And you should notice the first one, right? That was on the last number of your first assignment. That mainly the religious similarities that they had and a belief in the Great Spirit being intertwined in all things and all people, pantheism, animism, shamanism, polytheism. Those were all briefly discussed on the last number of the handout. So many of the answers that I intend to you to derive from the argumentative assignments. So I can't stress that enough as far as in the future on tests 2 and 3, study your argumentative handouts for the answers to the questions, okay? Number 4, 2 stereotypical images of Native Americans commonly portrayed in European chronicles are innocent and childlike or as bestial savages. That is true. Remember, innocent and childlike is largely ascribed to Bartolome de las Casas. I would also say Christopher Columbus and his first voyage to the Caribbean. And bestial savages, right? We saw that with Sepulveda, who had his debates with Las Casas and wanted to declare holy war against the natives. And to a certain extent, although it's not quite fair to him, because it was more complex than that in his history, a guy named Castillo. All right. So number 5, even by today's standards, Spanish colonization of the Americas was democratic, pluralistic, and tolerant. Well, if you look at number 3 of your Black Legend handout, they were depicted as anything but, right? Very hierarchical, very inequitable, very undemocratic. So absolutely not. Number 6, at the time of Spanish colonization of the Americas, Western Europe was arguably slowly transitioning toward a limitedly and brutally capitalistic economy. And I do make that subjective argument, that being the case. I make the case on number 1 in the Black Legend handout with Christopher Columbus and the world that was opening up for progressively more people back in Europe who wanted to come and colonize and fight or trade or all the above in the Americas and elsewhere. And also it is made on number 1 of the Southern Colonies handout, right? Where it says capitalism, burgeoning capitalism for better and for worse. So in both those segments, I make that subjective argument. All right. And I try to qualify that because that's arguable. All right. Because they still technically were mercantilist economies with the crown determining the allocation of resources, etc. Number 7, which of the following was not arguably an historical contribution by the Spanish to the Americas? A monotheistic belief in the Judeo-Christian God, yes. Elements of law we have borrowed from Rome and Germanic sources, yes. Modern notions of private ownership of property and of urban development, yes. They had to teach Native American tribes how to cultivate the land? No, they had already long achieved the Neolithic revolution in virtually all regions, especially Mesoamerica, but including regions of present-day United States, areas that had still not achieved the agricultural revolution were very few in number, very rare. All right, and then of course many elements of Hispanic culture, absolutely. the Spanish contributed. So that's functional history. You're not looking at right or wrong or villainizing a certain group. You're simply trying to ascertain how we got to where we are today. Number 8, to give credit where credit may or may not be due, the Spanish were arguably more apt to allow, quote, Negro slaves to buy their freedom and integrate into Latin American society thereafter than slaves were in many English American colonies. I made that point. Again, that's arguable, but I derived that from a particular book and made that claim in the handout. B, had a system of accountability. Remember the visitor general and his juez de residencia? That's absolutely true. And so you find them in both. Number 9, Las Casas, his brief relation of the destruction of the Indies, openly sympathized with Native Americans, whom he often labeled as ovejas mansas or meek sheep. Yes, that is true, right? And he tried to sway the crown into treating Native Americans more humanely. So that is true. Castillo, his true history, right? And that's a jab at Las Casas, right? He's saying, I'm going to write the real history of what happened with the conquest of Mexico. His Historia Verdadera, it's somewhat justified Spanish conquest of the Aztec or the Mexica, depicting the latter as anything but meek sheep. That's absolutely true. All right. His book justifies Spanish conquest primarily. And then De Sahagún. Remember, De Sahagún was a Catholic priest who was interested in anthropologically preserving the codices, in particular, the written books of the Aztec. He wanted to keep them for future generations, right? To be privy to Aztec and Mesoamerican history, culture, customs, etc. Right? But even he when he wrote his history of the indigenous people, he goes over an instance in which the parents are weeping profusely because they're offering their own children up to be sacrificed to the rain god. And he says that la culpa, the blame, should not be imputed upon the parents, nor even the religious leaders who out of ignorance felt compelled to do such. But the blame for such, he being a Spanish priest, goes to our ancient enemy, Satan, for blinding and tricking the indigenous people into thinking they have to commit such an infernal deed. So even big champions of Native American rights, like De Sahagún, Bernardino de Sahagún, even they insisted that Native Americans assimilate, that they drop their culture, their customs, their religion, and they become more like good Spanish Catholic servants. And so I thought that was worth saying as far as what I'm doing here with each of these people, right, is to me, I feel like they're emblematic of something bigger than themselves. And that's what I'm doing on each question. So I thought that was a message worth conveying. Number 12, remember I mentioned with Junipero Serra and his famous sacred expedition in the 21 missions in California, as I mentioned the juxtaposition, right? The balance and the strange juxtaposition of hagiographies, of these biographies that praise and literally want to make saints of the Catholic friars in the missions and priests, and as opposed to revisionist historiography that claims that they were ethnocentric tyrants, right? And that they were, that the missions were coercive institutions, etc. And that the Spanish missionaries were guilty of cultural genocide. All right, number 13, Don Juan de Oñate. I made the point with him in New Mexico to contend that I subjectively, as a student, if my professor told me to adhere to the Black legend and adhere to conflict history and make villains of the Spanish, right, as anti-models for today's society, and he told me to do that in forming a narrative of history, of Spanish American history in present day U.S. territory, I subjectively would choose New Mexico. because there's a lot of domination, manipulation, rebellion, oppression, fighting, etc. And Don Juan de Oñate began Spanish New Mexico, and he ended up being removed from office for abuse of power. So, so is challenging the Black legend and multiculturalism and democracy being present in Spanish New Mexico? No way. No way. Okay. Number 14, which of the following does not constitute a region of modern day US first claimed by a Spanish adelantado, someone going forward and claiming lands? I mentioned De Soto and the Mississippi River. I mentioned Vasquez de Coronado and his search for the 7 cities of Quivira of gold in the Southwest up into present day Kansas. I mentioned Cabrillo, Serra and Portola in present day California. Ponce de Leon attempted Florida, not modern day Massachusetts. Nothing was mentioned of the Northeast. And that one, you're looking for the wrong one. Which of the following was not mentioned in characterizing Spanish colonization of the Americas? The Spanish colonizers were, by today's standards, religiously ethnocentric. Yes. Notice even in the on the number in the Black legend handout, when I tried to defend the Spaniards, right? What was my argument? That they didn't know any better. That of course they were ethnocentric, looking through their own cultural lens at the Native Americans, but that we can't blame them for that. That's only natural. So of course, right? I contend in the argumentative handout that they were religiously ethnocentric. Spanish authorities generally intended the Spanish Americas to be hierarchical. That was the point made on number 3 in the Black legend handout. The Spanish colony of New Mexico, here it is again, was depicted as anomalously out of the ordinary, tolerant and democratic. No, I do not make that point. And in reality, in some places more so than others, the average colonized man had limited economic opportunities and a slight voice in government. And I make that point on the last number 5 in the Black legend assignment, with contending that the English, particularly in Virginia, were just as inequitable and hierarchical and undemocratic, etc., as the Spanish. And I give credit to the Spanish for those things. And remember, we talked about gracias al sacar notes. We talked about the juez de residencia. We talked about the city councils, the cabildos. So all those are true on D. Number 16, the textbook illustrates how French colonization exercised an influence disproportionate to their numbers, largely because of their relationship with Native Americans. It cites as an example French intrusion into the Native American fur trade. And if you have your textbook yet, again, I won't do this for tests 2 and 3. All textbook questions I leave up to you, but on test 1, I will, in case you haven't received your book yet. That is true. Brinkley does make that point about the French and their colonization being disproportionately powerful for a period of time in the 16 and early 1700s. Number 17, the textbook claims that rigid royal Spanish policy stifled economic development in the Americas. He uses that expression precisely. That is true as well. And so he contends, right, that the Spanish, they adhered to their mercantilist restrictions more faithfully, more stringently than the English did. And that the English American subjects are going to benefit from that reality, right? That the mercantilist restrictions were not enforced as well, supposedly, under the English as they were as under the Spanish. And Brinkley thinks that stifled Spanish America's economy. Number 18, a section from the Southern Colonies handout contends that colonial Virginia afforded an economically and politically equal playing field for all English colonists. No, it doesn't go that far, right? Remember, because it's called capitalism for better and for worse. It contends, right, that relative to England itself, more opportunities arose for poor English immigrants here, right, than existed back in England. We talked about indentured servitude. We talked about the availability of cheap or even free land. We talked about higher wages in the colonies. So absolutely, right? But the for worse part contended that you still had a large advantage, a leg up, if you already had money and connections, capital, etc. Right? Remember the head right system? You'd be offered 50, in some cases in Maryland, up to 200 acres for every servant that you brought over. So they got a huge advantage, right? And then the allocation of lands in the Tidewater region of Virginia, those who were well connected got the best land right off the bat. So I wouldn't go that far as I contend on number 18, to the extent that I would consider that false. Number 19, court American history portrayed John Smith as the embodiment of American leadership by merit or talent. Yes, court history portrays that. Very politically incorrect, very gutsy thesis, right? Contends that he earned his leadership. And remember again, yes.
Can you scroll down so we can see the
Sure.
the writing?
Sure.
Thank,
No problem.
thank you.
No problem. So court American history does praise Captain John Smith for his very pragmatic leadership. Remember, he was willing to lie to Powhatan. He was willing to extort Native Americans for corn when they were starving, and break his word with treaties with Powhatan. And so, but nevertheless, court history actually praises him for such, and depicts those like Lord Ratcliffe and the other well-to-do, wealthy leaders that were the initial leaders of Jamestown as as naive and incompetent. Number 21, the Southern colonies handout highlighted instances of agency. Remember, right, from the civil rights movement, where certain demographics like African Americans, women, Native Americans contend that, okay, conflict history, they have their heart in a good place, arguably, and that they want to vilify the winners, and they want to demonstrate how certain demographics have been victimized. But they don't want it to stop there, right? They don't want the narrative to stop there. And they say, wait a minute, we were moral agents with free will as well. We made decisions also that mattered, that helped determine the direction of events, even when those decisions may not have been considered morally upright or even astute, right? So that's what we mean by agency. So which was not mentioned in the handout. The Powhatan Confederacy's leadership arguably could have easily wiped out the small Jamestown settlement in its initial days. Absolutely. According to Helen Roundtree's book and many accounts, that is contended. B, the Huron and Natchez natives evidently made demands upon French colonists along the Mississippi River. That is true. Remember, there was a number that spoke on that. C, African-American slaves taking advantage of an acute need for their labor, and of all places, South Carolina. Yes. Remember, the name of that book was Black Majority. So that was contended as well. D, women acquiring their political and economic rights early in the Chesapeake, even if socially they were still stifled, and expectations for them to remain ladylike. Now, see, that's almost a trick question, because D is actually accurate. That is the case, just from numbers alone. Men greatly outnumbering the women and mortality rates amongst the men being high. It did indirectly, inadvertently empower women, and that's in our textbook, but nothing was stated of that in our handout, was it? There was no section on the women, and I probably need to rectify that. So because nothing was stated of that in the handout, that's the one that you want to choose, because that's what you don't find, right, in the Southern colonies argumentative assignment. Number 22, Alan Brinkley contends in the textbook that the Spanish's command over Indian labor did not fully meet the demands for labor, so they opted for African slaves subsequently. That's very simplistic, but remember that argument was made in the Southern colonies handout as well, that it was, an acute need for alternative labor. The number of indentured servants available decreased in the mid toward late 1600s, and also with Bacon's Rebellion, their reputation, right, as reliable workers very much plummeted at that time as well. So some people make that simple argument that it was an economic decision rather than a racist decision. And that really simplifies it, I think. It's more complex than that, but Alan Brinkley, if you look in the book, he does contend that. So that is true. Number 23, which of the following was mentioned as factual support of the thesis that slavery was not a racist, but practical and convenient institution? Okay. A, diminishing numbers and reliability of white indentured servants. Yes. B, the biological success of African Americans against New World pathogens. Yes. Remember, we talked about that, about how the Spaniards and after them, the English developed that type of image of Africans as being, quote, hardier and being able to endure the weather, the ecosystem, and malaria type diseases more effectively. That is true as well. Diplomacy with Native American tribes is also true. All of those are true, right? They began making deals, making treaties with the natives. And so hence, enslaving more of them became less of an option as well. All right. Number 24, the instructor cited Howard Zinn's take on Bacon's Rebellion as a possible microcosm or mini example of all except or but the following. A, capitalism created the incentive that prompted colonists to increase agricultural productivity, which enabled the Virginia joint stock investors to pay off investors and still afford to grant freedom dues to all indentured servants. No, that did not, it did not go that well in Virginia, right? That was one of the reasons for the rebellion, is a lot of indentured servants never received their freedom dues, never received their land and their supplies. And they became a disgruntled population that began squatting in the Piedmont region of Virginia. So the first one is false. And that's the one you're looking for, right? And then B, an inequitable society, especially plagued by false promises to would-be successfully independent farmers, high on expectations and low on education, can form a combustible atmosphere just waiting for rebellion to explode or tyrannical demagogues to take over. That's precisely his point in Howard Zinn's book, and the point that I tried to convey. C, many Southern governments and planters may have opted for slave labor after this rebellion. Absolutely. We have that from the House of Burgesses of Virginia, of them making that point that white indentured servants were too entitled. They wanted too much. And hence, with those high expectations, they would be a source of possible rebellion or friction, right, for the colony and for the authorities. So again, that one and this following one, you're looking for, ironically, the wrong answer. Number 25, which of the following was not mentioned in class pertaining to the alleged conditions endured by African slaves? A, the official slave codes provided the legal foundation for abuse, as they permitted harsh punishments for slaves' infractions and callously little accountability of masters and overseers regarding their chastisement of the slaves. That's absolutely true. Just looking at the slave codes alone, right? Just having to pay a small fine and just report it if in the form of chastising your slave, you happen to kill him or her. And then if a slave raises his or her hand in an act of possible rebellion, there were to be severe penalties for such. It's no wonder, right, that you're going to have such abuses under slavery. The codes set it up that way. B, Fogel and Ingerman's thesis. We talked about this, the Time on the Cross book, that slaves' conditions were not so terrible because it was in the best economic interest of their masters to keep them healthy and strong, has withstood scrutiny from other historians very well. No way, right? Mr. Virog, remember you asked questions about that as far as the nerve of those writers to have such a thesis. I mean, right off the bat, there has been ample evidence and rebuttals against that book. Okay, so that's the one that's wrong. C, Madam's diaries, historical notices in newspapers and almanacs, and excavated skeletal remains suggest that slaves and their masters and overseers often had hostile relations that often rendered slaves victims of psychological, emotional, and physical torment. Absolutely. All right. Number 26, French Louisiana's official and unofficial defiance of old world mercantilist restrictions upon opportunities for non-nobles was depicted in the Southern colonies handout as having emanated from the genuine egalitarian idealism of her leaders. No, remember, it was argued that it happened by accident. Remember, there weren't enough soldiers. There weren't enough women for nuclear families. There weren't enough supplies. So hence, right, they grudgingly allowed known, like Jean Lafitte, known pirates to enrich themselves with trade, people to engage in economic opportunities and marry whom they wanted. All of that fluidity happened somewhat by accident, right? Not by the design of the French rulers. And the metaphor is that the old mercantilist world of Europe, that American soil just wasn't conducive for it, right? That it's part of American court history, that their institutions just did not grow well here on our soil. Let's see here, number 27. The French were depicted in the Southern colonies handout as having greatly abused their strength in numbers and in resources in order to dictate terms to the natives. No, you see just the opposite, right? In the handout, that the Native Americans dictated terms to them. And that's a case of Native American agency. So that one's false. Number 28.
Mr.
Yeah.
Kowal,
Yeah.
just to clarify for number 25, that one, so I could have sworn you just said right now that B was wrong, but I could have sworn we did talk about, like, that was in the first, that was in our first assignment.
Yeah, no, you're right. But notice Destiny, it says that their thesis has withstood scrutiny very well. And remember, the point made in the Southern colonies handout is that it doesn't hold water, that it doesn't hold up well, that there's plenty of evidence that slaves were treated awfully.
Oh, yeah, okay. Got it.
Okay, no problem. So
Thank you.
yeah, that no problem. That's why that one's wrong, as I'm making the point that their thesis that slaves weren't treated that badly because they were expensive investments. I'm making the point erroneously that has withstood scrutiny very well, as if that has a lot of merit to it and people still adhere to it.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay, the author of Albion Seed, David Hackett Fisher, suggests all the following except the demographic that was able to establish first effective settlement of each subsequent English North American colony fashioned its future folkways in its own likeness. That's pretty much the thesis of that book. So yes. B, that the South's seigneurial economy, and seigneurial, right? It's kind of medieval. It's kind of archaic, with having like a manor, MANOR system economically, of lords with people working for them on their land, with feudal dues paid to their lords above them, right? That the South's seigneurial economy, its elitist and chivalric culture and other folkways were primarily the result of the gentry classes' first effective settlement of the area. Yes. Because remember, he makes that dichotomy, right? That it kind of leads to the narrative of the Civil War, that the South was established right off the bat in a very kind of archaic manner, like medieval-like manner. And then C, that most English immigrants to the Southern colonies in the 1600s were liberty-loving, egalitarian Democrats. No way. No way. Right? I mean, he really doesn't even go that far with the Northern colonies. But if anything, he goes closer in that direction with the Northern colonies, right? Because remember, the Northern colonies were largely colonized by people from the bourgeoisie, literally people from the cities. And they expected more. They wanted participation in government. They wanted certain rights. They did what they pleased economically. And so, yeah, so C is definitely incorrect. Which of the following does not match? A, Roger Williams was depicted as a well-meaning progressive advocate for religious freedom. Yes. Right. It's simplistic, and I need to read a more up-to-date biography on Roger Williams, because his, revisionist history permeates everything now. And I'm sure they have found some dirt on this guy. But in my handout, right, I still went along with praising this guy as being very idealistic and tolerant, etc. And I did the same thing limitedly with William Penn, didn't I? So William Penn was depicted as relatively sincere in his Quaker conversion and in his desire to embody meekness and brotherly love in issuing his Charter of Liberties. I give him that credit. Remember, my revisionist section on him that kind of criticizes him pertains to his treatment of Native Americans, not religious toleration. C, Dutch New Netherlands was depicted as having transferred tolerant policies from back in the Netherlands to the New World. No, remember, I was tougher on the Dutch. And I made the argument that the Dutch merely tolerated certain demographics because of economics, right? Because they were contributing to the Dutch West India Company's profits. So hence, they were just as guilty of having intolerant sentiment towards certain groups. We have it in quotes. The Quakers, they wrote ill of them. They especially wrote ill of the Jewish community in New York City and New Amsterdam. And they wrote ill of a gentleman named, known in the sources as the Black Turk, Anthony Van Sally. But they contended, right? Nevertheless, let them be, because they're helping the company prosper. So that one, right? C, I did not state that. That one doesn't match from the Southern Colonies handout or the Northern Colonies handout. All right, 30, William Penn renounced his autocratic rule over Pennsylvania, willingly granting political rights, powers, and economic resources and opportunities to commoners, including some marginalized and persecuted non-English folk from Europe. That was all on the first section of William Penn. So yes, I did praise him for doing such. 31, while Penn showed courtesy and respect to Native Americans regarding diplomacy, evidence suggests that he also enthusiastically pressed Native American tribes to sell him their territory without seeming concern for their future. And yes, I make that point as well. That's the revisionist point that I did make in the Northern Colonies argumentative assignment. Number 32, coverage of the New England colonies until the concession that some of their institutions were relatively, compared to others back then, democratic and progressive. Yes, that was the very first number of the Northern Colonies handout. So we talked about their democratic form of church organization, right? Their congregational churches that were autonomous, each church without a presbyter or bishop to oversee them. They democratically elected their own pastors. They had New England town hall meetings, and in their grand council, they allowed every village of 100 to elect a representative to be present in that grand council. So yes, we talked about their education, right? Forming the Ivy League schools, Harvard in 1636, their old deluder law, which you got to remember, the old deluder, the old deceiver is Satan. So it shows you the role of religion in education, right? But according to the old deluder law, they had the first colonial public school system for children. And so all those are true. Number 33, class coverage of the New England colonies conceded that Puritans could be overbearing or tyrannical in demands for conformity amidst their rather angst-filled covenant notion, and downright imperialist bullies in their foreign policy. And in the very next section, that's exactly the point I make, right? So remember, they're very exclusivist and to who they would allow to be a full-fledged church member and hence a full-fledged citizen in their colony by religious standards. They had they had select men come and spy on people in their homes to see how they were living, to see if they were sinning. because of their notion of the covenant, that their society had made a covenant with God, and that if they broke God's laws and commandments, that God would punish the entire community. So hence they infringed on people's individual autonomy, right? And said, hey, they would knock that cigarette right out of your mouth and say, don't smoke, don't do this, don't do that, right? Or our God is going to be angry with all of us. So number 34, an argumentative section contends with the court note history notion that the Dutch colonists of New York were progressive cosmopolitans practicing tolerance on principle, implying that official Dutch tolerance in later New York may have been at least partially due to economic concerns. That's a redundant question, which I probably should rectify. So that one is true, right? That's a second question where that's been addressed. Number 35, according to Alan Brinkley in the textbook, the British Navigation Acts were stifling to American colonists. No, that's false. He contends that the Navigation Acts and the mercantilist laws were very poorly upheld here in British North America. And I don't want to get too much more into it because that goes into our very next subject of the War for Independence. All right, but that one's false. Number 36, which of the following is false regarding the sacred expedition of the Spanish of 1769? It marked what the Spanish officially declared to be a more peaceful colonization of Upper California. Absolutely. They claimed that this was an enlightened method, right? As opposed to like the requerimiento, where they would give you 24 hours to convert or declare holy war against you. This was a peaceful alternative. B, it initiated a Spanish colonization pattern of establishing missions, pueblos or cities, presidios or military forts, and haciendas or plantations and farms. That is true. C, Spanish missions have consistently and universally been praised as paternalistic purveyors of civilization. No way. Remember, the Spanish court history absolutely depicted them as such, but revisionist history has torn into that, right, for decades. Number 37, in the St. Lawrence River and Ohio Valley, tribes like the Iroquois took advantage of European demand for furs and militarily ensconced themselves into an economically vital partner position. That is true, as evidence of their agency. The Iroquois took over the Huron, took their lands from them in the St. Lawrence Valley, so they could be the providers of the furs to the white men, and they could dictate the terms thereof. All right. Number 38, just kind of just in case you didn't know, fact. St. Augustine, Florida, established by the Spanish, is the oldest surviving Euro-American city. That is true. Dates back to 1565 under a guy named Pedro Menendez de Avila, who had plenty of fighting with French Huguenot, with Native Americans, etc., and claiming Spanish Florida. Number 39, the Puritans' societal notion of the covenant arguably formed the foundation for their tolerance of individuals' lifestyles. No, right? That's very ironically stated. Just the opposite, right? They had no problem with intruding in your personal space in the name of the covenant to make sure that everyone was living up to God's standards. And number 40, Tories in the English Parliament during the 1770s allied themselves with the colonists in demanding colonial rights as English subjects. No, by and large, the Tories were the conservatives who wanted to put us in our place and to get tough on us with English policies at the end of the French and Indian War. And we'll get into that again, our very next subject after test 1. All right. So are there any questions?
I don't have any questions about what you went over, but before we leave, I do want to make sure that I have the right book. So I kind of want to.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. All right. Okay, good. I have a new name where I think that's the one that was a phone number previously. So that's great. Give me a moment to write that person's name down. Okay, guys. So I have everyone's name.
You put Destiny down, right?
Let's see here. I did, Destiny. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. All right, so I will add your extra credit to your test one score. All right, so thank you. I always get a good turnout with this class, and I'm very appreciative of that. Like I said, I'm a bit eager to get back into the classroom, and this is the next best thing. This is the closest thing I get. So I appreciate it. All right, so if you guys don't have any other questions, I have your names down. You can go ahead and leave. And Alonda is going to show me her book, and I'll verify if that's correct. And you guys kick that test butt. All right, and have a great rest of the week.
Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So this is the book that I got today.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I recognize the cover right away.
Okay, so it is the right one.
That's right.
Okay, good. I was a little worried because not anywhere on here does it say second edition. It just says AP edition. So I was not positive it was going to be the right one.
Yeah. No, but I mean, it's volume 1 though, right? I'm pretty much positive it is. I had that one before.
I have no idea. It literally doesn't say volume about.
Look
on here
look at
anywhere.
look at the table of contents of the chapters, and does it start with pre-Columbian Native Americans, or does it start with Reconstruction?
Connecting concepts, America before Columbus.
That's right. You
It
got the
is.
right one.
The collision of cultures.
That's absolutely right.
Okay. Phew. All right. I feel better now.
Now, I have no
Very-
idea. I have no idea why they have so many different book covers for a single book. Alan
Yeah.
Brinkley's textbook has so many different covers.
I know. Well, and
It's
that's why when
crazy.
I started going through, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And then I was really happy. I mean, I found it on Abe's Books for $22.
Oh, that's wonderful. Good.
So, and they had more copies. So anybody that's still listening, Abe's Books, they still have copies of this book. So
Great.
for cheap, it was like the cheapest one I could find. And then I did have one more question I wanted to ask you, and this is about a conflict in my schedule.
Sure.
On Tuesdays. So on Tuesday mornings, I have an online class that goes until 10:20. And then I have my psych class that goes until 12:20. And then your class starts at noon.
At
So
noon,
I
yeah.
wasn't sure if I should leave my psych class early and come to your class, or I don't know how to handle that.
Oh, shoot.
And I didn't know
hate
that
when
this was going to
happens.
happen until your class finally loaded, because it
Yeah.
didn't have a time on your class.
Yeah. Shoot.
So
Yeah, I don't know, Alonda, if I could change my time or not.
no, and I wasn't expecting you to.
But
My
no,
question
I
is,
just wanted to convey
Oh.
that to you, because if I felt total liberty to do that, I would just do that.
yeah,
But I'm not sure I can do that. But I would be happy to give you full credit at chiming in at 12:21.
okay, yeah. See, and that's kind of what I was wondering. I didn't know if I should just skip out on the ending of my psych class, or
Yeah, no, you don't
Just
have to
20
do
minutes
that.
of
You
yours.
can go the full time in your psych class and
Okay.
just come late to mine. And,
okay, yeah,
and-
because I'm actually on campus for that psych class, so I'll have to leave the class, find some
Oh,
place to
shoot.
sit down, and then log into your class. So.
yes. Okay.
But yeah, I definitely will be at your class on Tuesdays, and that starts next week. So I will be late to your class every Tuesday then. So-
Okay. No,
then just
I
watch the
understand. I'm
video.
sorry.
No, it's okay.
I know that happens.
Yeah, no worries. I just
But
wanted
that-
to see how I should handle it.
Yeah. So that makes me all the more appreciative of you coming. And so,
Okay.
yeah, just do the best you can. That's all I
All right.
could ask. And I'll still
Super.
give you full credit for coming.
Okay, awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you
All
so
right.
much, and I'll see you Tuesday late.
All right. Sounds good.
All right, thanks. Have a good
Bye-bye.
weekend.
Hi, son. All right. So anybody else? You guys doing okay? The three of you?
I just had a question on the book because my cover looks different than hers.
Sure.
Give me 1 second.
No problem.
Can you see? I can't
Not
see my
yet.
screen.
I saw your fingertips. That's it.
Wait, hold on. I can't see my screen, that's why. Okay, can you see like the book or no?
That's it. That's precisely the one that I have.
Oh, okay, so this one's okay?
That's perfect.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I'm glad you got the right one.
I know. I was scared for a second. I was like, wait, that looks different.
Nope, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Have a nice
You're
day.
welcome. You as well. All right, Kaleo, Michael, can I help you guys? You guys good?
Yes, so it was I couldn't see the image of their books. It seemed very different from mine. Let me see if I could share my screen actually. I don't know if it'll allow me to do that.
Yeah, give it a try.
Oh. Okay, so I can't because it said host disabled participant screen sharing, but
Oh no.
it's because I got a digital version of the book. It's what they gave me when I initially went to go pick up all my books at the bookstore. But it says American History, Volume 1 to 1865 by Alan Brinkley.
Yes, and it's American History Connecting with the Past.
Yes, Connecting with the Past, Volume 1.
That's perfect.
Okay, that'll work.
Yeah, that's perfect, Michael. That should work.
Okay, cool. And then one more question I had was regarding the YouTube link. I never acquired the YouTube link for past Zoom meetings. Do you still upload, or do you upload on the YouTube at all by any chance?
I do. I upload on YouTube.
Okay. Will Tuesdays and today's Zoom meeting be uploaded on there?
They will. Yes, sir.
Okay. By any chance, I'm unable to find it under modules or anywhere else. Is a YouTube link under the syllabus that I might have missed?
No, I only have it under modules.
Under modules. Okay.
But in the worst case scenario, I think you could you should be able to find it on YouTube generically, putting my name in.
Oh, just your name. Okay.
And I mean, just hitting my name, you're going to come across a lot. So you have to be more specific, but you could find the specific one. I hope it doesn't come to that though. I'm hoping that you could find it on modules because that's where I'm posting it.
Okay, for sure. I actually just searched you up on YouTube and I found you were the first person. So that works perfect for me already.
All right, great, Michael.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, have a good day, okay?
You as well. Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.